Want to welcome everybody this evening. Shabbat Shalom. First and foremost, I of course want to welcome those of you that are here for the Bat Mitzvah, for the Stern family. It hopes to be a wonderful Shabbat and a true Simcha, which is something I think we are all in need of. Of course, I want to welcome our regulars who would have been here regardless. Welcome back to Shabbat services. I know that there are also others of you here who may not be here tomorrow, who are here tonight as an act of defiance, here because you want to be in shul when others obviously cannot be. And then there is an even perhaps smaller group of people who are here, more of whom will be here tomorrow, who are just non-Jews from the community who called up our offices and asked if they could come to synagogue as a sign of solidarity. By the way, if that describes you, please come and see me after services so I can personally welcome you to our congregation. I know that there is a group coming tomorrow for that exact reason. I spoke at length on Sunday evening at our evening of solidarity when we had over 400 people in attendance here at the synagogue, and we spoke about sadness and we spoke about grief and we obviously spoke about anti-Semitism. And when I got home that evening, for those of you that were not here, I will reiterate some of what I spoke about. When I got home that evening, I realized that my daughter Naomi, who's 8 in 3rd grade, was going to be going to Jewish day school the next morning, and that I had reached my limit in terms of hiding the news from her, despite her having been in shul on that particular Shabbat a week ago, and despite her questions as to why I ran into my office where she and a friend were playing and told her that she was forbidden to be in the hallway, and that she could be in my office or next to me on the bima, and those were the only 2 places where she was permitted to be in the sanctuary or in the synagogue. Despite her questions, she didn't actually push once we got home. And obviously my wife and I watched the news all day on Sunday. And for whatever reason, my daughter, who is perceptive, intentionally displayed a high level of cognitive dissonance and for the first time perhaps in her life, didn't pay attention to what was on the TV. So I came home on Sunday evening and I sat her down and I explained to her what had happened in Pittsburgh on Shabbat and why her daddy was so angry and adamant about her not being in the hallway in synagogue. And this is a girl who had already experienced 2 bomb threats as a 1st grader in Poznak. This is a girl whose grandparents and great-grandparents were survivors of the Shoah. This is a little girl who knows that she's a first-generation American and that her mother and her entire family had to flee the former Soviet Union after the Shoah. And so she sat in her bed and she was upset and the tears started coming down her face, and she asked me a question that I will not forget, and her question was, what if none of this is real? What if none of this is real? What are we doing here? What if none of this is real, she asked me. And I'm certain she's not the first Jewish person to ask the question, what if none of this is real? What if that great book behind me isn't real? What are we doing here? Why are we putting ourselves at risk? And I know for a fact she's not the first person to ask this question, because when things really became tense in my house, when our daughter, my youngest, was first born, there were 3 children under the age of 4. We got an au pair first time, and she was from the Czech Republic. She was a religious Catholic. And as we were sitting around the kitchen table, she volunteered the information that her grandfather was an Auschwitz survivor. This is a girl who I was driving to church every Sunday. So I asked her the question, what do you mean your grandfather was an Auschwitz survivor? And she explained to me that he and his twin brother had been taken to the camps, and when they were liberated, they swore that they would never speak of being Jewish again. And they renounced it on the spot. They married Catholic women, and there in front of me was his granddaughter, a Catholic, religious. And so I know that Jews have asked this question, is any of this worth it? But the Torah, my friends, and its traditions, if they were merely fairy tales, if they were as expendable as some people think they might be, if we could just drop them and run into the future 1 foot after the other, forgetting our past and forgetting our ancestors, I'm almost certain that Judaism would have crumbled long ago. It would have crumbled with the temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE. It never would have been carried into exile. It never would have survived the Crusades. It never would have withstood the Inquisition. It never would have escaped from pogrom, and it never would have risen from the ashes of the Shoah. Jews would have forgotten the Torah long before my daughter asked the question whether or not any of this is real. We know it's real. And we know it's real because our ancestors would have dropped Torah long ago if it wasn't. And so I explained to Naomi in a conversation much longer than the one I am going to share with you, that one of the objectives of anti-Semitism, one of the objectives of what happened last Shabbat in Pittsburgh, is to cause Jews to stop believing. It is to cause us to lose our faith in God. It is to cause us to weigh the dangers of being Jewish, which are real, against the benefits of being Jewish, which are many, and to come to the conclusion that being Jewish just isn't worth it. And there have been Jews that have come to that conclusion. I am not the descendant of one of those Jews because I'm standing here a believer in Torah. None of you are descendants of one of those types of Jews because you're here in synagogue to find some aspect of spirituality during these dark and difficult times. Being Jewish, I explained to Naomi, as I had mentioned on Sunday evening, being Jewish has always been a balancing act between being scared and courageous simultaneously. That those two things in other people's worlds may be mutually exclusive. But in our world, being scared and being courageous are two sides of the same coin of Jewish identity. That's just the way it is. And it's possible to be both. We know that. I'm both right this second. There was a man who walked in a few minutes ago, standing in the back looking for his family, and he stood in the back for a very long time, and I was the only one who could see him. And you can imagine the thoughts that were racing through my brain as a man stood in the back perusing this crowd. Sure, we're all a little nervous, but we're far more courageous for being in this room on this night, recognizing that Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, lives. And so there's another dimension of the conversation I had on Sunday evening, and I'd like to reiterate that part of the conversation. I also spoke of it on Wednesday, and that has to do with our relationship to God, and it has to do with the way we experience God. For those of you that come to daven on a regular basis, and even those of you that may not come to daven on a regular basis, most of you who are Jewish are familiar with the Amidah, our standing prayer, where we stand and we face the ark, and during the week there are 19 benedictions that we utter, and they are shortened. There are only 7 during the Shabbat. And in the midst of this prayer, there is a public declaration said out loud called the Kedusha. You're all familiar with it. We get on our tippy toes and go, Kadosh, 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 Adonai, Tzevaot, Malok kol haaretz kivodo. And then we say, Baruch kavod Adonai mim komo. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. His presence fills all the earth. And then we jump on our tippy toes again and say, blessed is the presence of God from his place. What we don't recognize as we speed through this very familiar prayer is where it comes from. That first line, Kadosh, 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 Adonai, Tzevaot, Malok kol haaretz kivodo, holy, holy, holy is God. His presence is everywhere. That was written by Isaiah in the 8th century, the golden age of Jewish history. The temple stood. It was possible to bring korbanot, sacrifices, to the altar. There was a high priest. Everything that we read in the Torah with regard to that temple ritual was being enacted on a daily basis. Things were good. And it was possible to see God everywhere, to feel God everywhere. It was as if he filled every space, which is why we say, holy is God, whose presence is everywhere. That second line, Baruch kavod Adonai mim komo, blessed is the presence of God from his place. That was uttered by Ezekiel. And it was uttered in the 6th century BCE. And it was uttered as Ezekiel watched the destruction of the first temple, as he watched the Jewish people ravaged by the Babylonians, as he watched everything that he knew and the spiritual epicenter of the Jewish people crumble to the ground, burned right before his very eyes. And yet he said, blessed is God. But he said it differently. Blessed is God from wherever God is, his place. In other words, when we contrast these two perspectives, one from Isaiah and one from Ezekiel, we understand the theological implications of this very powerful prayer, the Kedusha. Sometimes in our lives, it feels as if God is everywhere. Our blessings are so abundant we can't even count them. As Americans, this should sound quite familiar. We have won the Jewish genetic lottery. We are a part of the most politically, socially, and economically accepted generation of Jews in history. Sure, when we look around, it seems as if God is in every single space. And then Saturday came along. And all of a sudden, our theological perspective was set in line with so many generations of Jews before us who've experienced anti-Semitism on that level. And suddenly God seemed a little bit distant, a little bit less accessible, maybe even elusive, far off in his own place. Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. What's important to recognize is that both of those are possible theologies. Sometimes we feel really connected to God. Sometimes we search for God. But what we don't do is deny God. We don't stop praying to God. And we don't cease recognizing the blessings of our life. Our parsha this week is parsha. Is she listening? What's the parsha? Good job. That could have gone very badly. Chayei Sarah. It is a parsha, ironically, on this, the Shabbat that has stopped the Jewish community's Shiva, because we're all sitting Shiva. And it has stopped the Jewish community's Shiva, and that particular parsha is bookended by two stories of death, the death of Sarah and the death of Abraham. And yet the parsha is called Chayei Sarah, the book of life. Part of the reason I think, and I mentioned this on Sunday, why Torah has become and has always been the focal point of our people is because it celebrates that very idea. Torah commands us and challenges us to seek out light, even in the darkest of spaces, to celebrate the blessings of life despite being face to face with death and tragedy. That's what Judaism is. That's why we say all the time, Eitz Chaim Hila Machazikim Ba. The Torah is a tree of life for those who cling to it. It is no small irony. It's the same name of the synagogue. Eitz Chaim Hi. It is a tree of life for those that cling to it. And so I want to read you, to close, an exclamation point that I think emphasizes what many of us are feeling, and that we are all challenged and commanded to look past darkness, to find light, and to recognize that the Torah has always been an inspiration towards good, positivity, celebration, joy, and life. It is a poem by Zev Steinberg. I'm going to try to get through it. For those of you that understand or speak Hebrew a little bit even, it'll be even that much more powerful. Zev Steinberg wrote this. Little boy, what's your name? Do you have one? Sweet baby, just 8 days. What should we call you? I've heard the sacred circumcision postponed for jaundice yellow, but never before for blood shed red. Is your name Shalom? We long for peace in this troubled world. I hope you are Shalom. Is your name Nachum? Oh, how we need to be comforted. Nachum, comforted. In our grief, I hope your name is Nachum. Is your name Raphael? Our broken hearts and bleeding souls need healing. Raphael. I hope you are Raphael. You should have been carried high into the congregation on Shabbat morning, passed from loving hands to loving hands on a cushioned pillow to receive your Jewish name. Instead, your elders fell and were carried out on stretchers, their names on tags. Is your name Moshe? Our unbearable anguish and rage demands justice. I hope you are Moshe. Is your name Ariel? We need the ferocious strength of lions, Ari, to protect our people. I hope you are Ariel. Is your name Barak? Lightning. We need courageous warriors to vanquish our enemies. I hope you are Barak. The blood on Shabbat morning was supposed to be covenantal, not sacrilegious, sacramental, not sacrificial, sacred, not unholy. The tears were supposed to be of boundless joy, not bottomless sorrow. The cries were supposed to be mazal tov, not the mourner's kaddish. Is your name Simcha? We need to end sadness by bringing joy into our world. I hope you are Simcha. Is your name Yaron? We need an end to mourning by bringing song into our lives. I hope you are Yaron. Is your name Matan? Gift. We need the gift of children who will bring a better tomorrow. I hope you are Matan. So little boy, what's your name? Take them all if you will. Take 1,000 names. Be peace and comfort and healing. Be justice and strength and courage. Be joy and song and a gift to the world. Be every good name and every good thing. And sweet baby, take one more name if you will. Because I hope you will be blessed with a long, blissful, beautiful, and meaningful life. I hope your name is Chaim, life. May all of their memories be a blessing. May the Jewish people live. I ask you all to please rise.